All right, I will say hello and welcome back to another episode of the Balance Breakdown. I've decided that's the new name, the Balance Breakdown. So,
Very nice.
yeah, we did the preview show for UFC 252, Miocic and Cormier, and this is going to be the post show for UFC 252, Cormier and Miocic. Obviously, we just touched on this a little bit off there. Sean, I should probably mention just before we get into it. Tommy is away today. He's coaching and training, so he is not joining us for this one. But just again, a big thank you to Tommy for doing the preview show. Overall, Sean, I actually enjoyed this card. I thought it was pretty good. We had a few fights that we touched on in the preview show that were guys that wouldn't usually get a shot in the UFC, but some of them turned out to be pretty good. Some of them turned out to be absolutely fucking terrible. But I'm sure that we'll get into that as we move down the card. But yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a good card. What about you?
Yeah, definitely. I think surprising is the key word here for sure.
Yeah.
Dan Chavez turned out to be a real fighter and actually a
Yeah.
pretty good fighter as well. Not a homeless guy. So apologies for that. And then what's his name? Pineda, finished, proved to be extremely dangerous.
Yeah. Fuck you.
Um,
Fuck you.
yeah. But yeah, it was surprising as well. Just because of some of the weirdness,
Yeah.
again, and I'm sure we're going to be getting into it in more detail when we actually look at the fights individually. But yeah, especially the Sean O'Malley, there is so much sort of, bizarre about that. Yeah, but I'm sure we'll get into that anyway.
Yeah. I mean, let's go straight in, right? So we'll start with the main event. Now, for anyone that hasn't watched the fight, then go and watch it. Absolutely phenomenal bout. I was really impressed with both fighters, actually. The thing that I tried to do the most in this matchup is I tried to watch it as if I was scoring the fight rather than watching it as a fan. Because what I find a lot of the time is I watch these, because I'm so invested in these fights, I watch them as a fan, and then I get to the end and I'm like, I have absolutely no idea who
Yeah,
won that. I
yeah,
couldn't even begin to tell you. I'm jumping off my seat. I'm screaming at random shit. So I tried to watch it as a fan, and we'll dive into the technical detail, but I would have been happy with 4-1 Miocic or 3-2 Miocic in this fight. I think that the first, second, and third were the clearest rounds to score, and I thought fourth and fifth were really, really close. I thought the first you have to give to DC. The second you have to give to Miocic with the knockdown. I thought the third was relatively easy to score for Miocic. The fourth and fifth is just where it gets real tricky for me. And I thought that the fourth, I thought Stipe did enough. And in the fifth, I thought Stipe did enough. But what we saw was Daniel putting all the pressure on in the fourth and the fifth, right? He took the third round off, quote unquote, and then really came back in the fourth and the fifth. And although there was that fucking awful eye poke, I mean there was a bad eye poke for both of them, frankly, but the eye poke for Daniel seemed like it was extremely debilitating as his eye closed up almost immediately. But yeah, I thought that he fought well with one eye, to be honest. But let's get into it. What was your thoughts on the actual fight, on the game plans, on the tactics, everything else?
Yeah, so I thought this was a really good one. As far as strategies are concerned, especially for rematches, you've got quite a difficult task if you're thinking from the perspective of the coaching staff on either side, because on one hand, you've obviously got to do the standard thing of coming up with a game plan that sort of takes away where your opponent was strong in the first fight. So I think for DC, it's most of those dirty boxing exchanges where he does most of the damage. And even in this fight, whenever he did get there and Stipe didn't exit properly, he still did a lot of damage. And then the second thing is that you've got a really short space of time to come up with those strategies. And like you were saying before this fight, the book is written on both of these guys to this extent. Like, they're not going to be sort of introducing completely new techniques. So whatever strategy the coaches come up with, it has to be easy to execute and then obviously nullify the strengths of the opponent. And I think that Stipe's team specifically did a really, really good job of this. And even after the fight, when DC was interviewed, he was saying that especially the pushing up against the fence with the wrist control,
Yeah.
he'd think was the tiny thing that may have given Stipe the edge. But if you think of where Cormier's strong, which is obviously that dirty boxing clinch, he's got those really nasty tight uppercuts. To be able to generate power from those, you obviously need the free right hand to punch with, but you need some sort of a hinge at the hips or like a squat to be able to generate that power coming up through the uppercut. So pushing DC up against the fence and making his posture so it's vertical and that lower hip hinge isn't possible at all, and getting the wrist control was just such a perfect way to not only nullify DC, but like I said before, it's quite simple to teach that, you know, like Stipe will have always worked those positions, but it was just really impressive that the coaches found that, managed to teach him it, and it gave Stipe a safe position he could go to at any point during the fight where he was sort of straying into where DC is at his strongest, which is in that clinch.
For sure. And I think, I mean, that to me was the big thing in the fight. Well, there was a couple of things. The first was that we saw some more leg kicks, right? And we saw that Stipe was far more offensive. And I think that worked well for both DC and for Stipe, because what DC seemed to try to do this time is fight on the inside, but after Stipe had thrown. So he used the counter to get inside and fight. The problem is that that's Stipe's game, right? Stipe's game is being the longer fighter, being the Golden Gloves boxer. And Stipe's 1-2 was just beautiful the whole fight. So nice. And he landed it at will. Now, DC, on the other hand, implemented his game plan pretty well as well. When he got on the inside, there were lots of big right hands. There were lots and lots of incredibly powerful shots from both men. But the difference, as you say, is even in open space, when DC was beginning to clinch with Stipe in the first round, actually, DC, which was the easiest DC round to score, DC caught Stipe in exactly the same position in the middle of the cage. And I turned to Liam and I was like, oh boy, like this is not good, right? And I don't know whether this is just these guys have shared the cage for well over 25 minutes at that point previously. And I wonder whether Stipe just kind of fell into the old way, but managed to implement his game plan pretty quickly afterwards, right? And, what we saw Stipe do, even in the open cage. And what's so interesting is we talked about this for Henry Cejudo and Demetrius Johnson, is that wrist control, right? The bicep control, the wrist control when it comes to the clinch. And now we're seeing it used to nullify a completely different set of attacks. In open space, DC wasn't able to get those shovel punches in. He wasn't able to even look for a single leg or a high crotch because Stipe was holding that wrist, right? And Stipe did well to fight underhooks, to nullify with overhooks. He just did really, really well. And it was very strange to see DC pressed up against the fence for as long as he was, right? And even, Stipe nearly took DC down on a number of occasions. And I mean, okay, it's DC, right? It's very difficult to get him to the ground. But I was impressed with Stipe's ability to get back up, his overall takedown defense. I thought his cardio looked really good. I mean, both men were very tired by the fifth, but for a heavyweight fight, for the volume that they put in, like, it was absolutely understandable.
Yeah.
But I was also really impressed with Stipe's footwork, right? Like, never did he allow himself to get pressed up on the cage for too long. He was always circling off. He was circling away from the right hand of DC. He was always landing the jab. He was always offensively landing his 1-2 in a way that would stop DC coming in. And I just thought that, he made DC respect his power much more in this fight than in previous fights, right? And I also thought that DC's covering of the body was both a good thing and a bad thing, because what it allowed is, obviously, we didn't see anywhere near as many body shots from Stipe. However, he did land some right hands to the body and he did land some left hooks to the body. What we did see is DC's head was just right there. It was just right there. And credit to DC's toughness. because as we saw in the second, DC got rocked and dropped, and one of the guys I was watching it with, it was like, that wasn't a drop, it was a slip. And then they panned to the corner and DC was like, did I just get dropped? And I was like, yes, motherfucker, like you just got dropped. If you're having to ask, did I just get dropped? Yes, you just got dropped. And to be honest, I thought DC did really well to recover. And I think Stipe actually made a mistake, to be honest, because he sort of lunged into mount, but he pushed his hips far too close to DC. And DC basically just held onto his hips, tucked his head in, and Stipe couldn't land the shots that he needed. I think maybe going into a Khabib type half guard there would have been better. But it's bye. Yeah, it was just, to give DC props though, however, like you saw DC get his wrestling nullified and to get one of his biggest advantages in the first fight nullified. And that was that dirty boxing clinch overhand right. And yet he still came out and he was still landing thunderous shots. He was still, he was chasing Miocic when they were against the fence on the breaks. He was looking for stuff. Like he still managed to take Miocic down, even though Miocic got back up pretty easily. Like I was so impressed with both of them.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because like you say, especially after that, the eye poke with DC, when he's in his corner and he's saying, I can't see, everything's black out of this eye. I think for most people, that would be a pretty terrifying, like if I was in that situation, I'd have no problem with saying, look, this was fun, but I'm going to go get my eye checked out. But he didn't even, think for a second, whether or not he was going back out there,
Agreed.
And it was really crazy just because of what you said. Like, there've been so many good adjustments from Stipe and his team, and Cormier still managed to be a bit of a nightmare out there. Like, just to go back to something you said before about the body shots, I think with DC, the benefit of going to his body like that early is twofold. Like, obviously, number one, you could get an instant reaction like the second fight with Stipe, where it really causes him damage. But even if you don't get that, the second benefit is that it opens up strikes to his head. Like we've obviously seen that with him against John Jones.
Yep.
And I feel like with Stipe, that right hand, it seemed like he could land it a lot more early and often because of that body shot threat. So, yeah, DC did amazingly well to sort of keep going, with all that stuff sort of considered.
I agree. And I also think we should give props to Marc Goddard as well, because, during the fight, DC called the eye poke to Marc Goddard and Goddard told him that it was a punch. Goddard then went back, watched the replay, realized it was an eye poke, and made a private apology to DC and his team, but also made a public statement to say that refs can't call what they don't see. And I think that's a really important statement. It's a really, really important statement because, look, we'll talk about stoppages and stuff here, like the Pineda Herbert stoppage. We'll talk about the Rosenstrike Junior Dos Santos stoppage. We'll talk about the Vera O'Malley stoppage and whatever. But I thought that Herb did a good job, and I think that people can't call what they don't see, and Goddard is right to say that, and we have to be, we have to give props where props is due, and I think that Goddard managed that pretty well.
Yeah, 100%. Because the whole point of why there's so much responsibilities on the shoulders of a ref is because they're supposed to be an impartial person that isn't influenced by anything around them. So, like you say, if they've not seen it, they can't be letting any sort of outside factors influence their decision. One of those obviously being a fighter saying, because it wouldn't be, I'm not saying DC would ever do this, but it wouldn't be the first time that a fighter has sort of faked a foul to get a bit of a rest, So I think he did the right thing, and credit to him, like you say, for coming out and apologising, because we've had a couple of sort of controversial stoppages recently where the refs sort of come out after, and even with, a lot of evidence pointing in the direction that there was a mistake made there, they're still not really thinking there's a mistake. And, so it takes a pretty big person to apologise like that immediately.
I agree. So 2 questions I'll ask. Does Daniel Cormier retire? Is the first one.
So I'm not sure whether he actually will. I'd like him to, because I think even though technically he's not going out on top, I just don't see what else he can achieve at this point. Like, he's done so many things, and he said that he wouldn't come back unless he's fighting for a title, and he said that he thinks that's pretty far off now. I don't agree with that. I think a name like DC, especially in the heavyweight division, he wouldn't be years and years and years off, but still, I just don't see the point. I think most likely now Stipe's won, they're going to be thinking along the lines of Jones versus Stipe or the Ngannou rematch. So it's going to be a little while anyway, but he's got a good gig doing like the analyst stuff. I think he hangs it up now, to be honest.
So I actually agree with him that I think a title shot is far away. And the reason why I agree with him is because if Miocic gets through Ngannou again, I'm not sure who beats him at heavyweight. I'm really, really not sure. I don't think that you're going to find the Black Beast. I don't think he will beat him. I don't think Jairzinho Rosenstrike will beat him.
Parker Porter? That was a joke. Sorry.
Jesus fucking Christ. I essentially just don't see who beats him other than Ngannou, right?
Yeah.
And John Jones afterwards talked about coming up to heavyweight, but we've seen John Jones sell wolf tickets at heavyweight for years at this point. If John Jones does go up and beat Stipe, DC is right in there. The trilogy is there. Absolutely. But that's a big if, isn't it? It's a big if for John Jones to go up. And I think it's a difficult fight against Miocic as well, to be honest. But yeah, the second question is Ngannou versus Miocic. What do you think of that?
I'm not sure. For me, I prefer. I like the idea of the John Jones fight a lot more. I think it's a lot fresher, and I also think that part of me, I really like Stipe, and I think the UFC would almost like it if he went in there against Ngannou. Ngannou knocks him into the shadow realm, and then the Ngannou realm begins, and there's not that hiccup on the record. I think if they were being honest, that's the way that Dana White would like things to play out. So yeah, I don't want to see that happen to Stipe at this point, to be honest.
I think if UFC could have a dream year, they allow Stipe to recover. They do Ngannou versus Stipe. Stipe gets dropped into the shadow realm, as you say, and then they do John Jones and Ngannou for the heavyweight title, and that's one of the biggest fights UFC can make ever.
So I agree. I don't think that John Jones would take the fight against Ngannou. I think he would take it against Stipe, which is another reason. I think we all know John Jones is extremely clever from a sort of strategic combat sports perspective. And I think he knows that. I know there was the hype going back and forth between him and Francis, and this was just the sense that I was getting. But I think watching Stipe, because Stipe, isn't as intimidating a force in terms of the power, he thinks that's a win that he could, create a strategy for. Whereas it's just my sort of personal feeling that I'm not sure. I think if Ngannou won, I'm not sure necessarily that John Jones would be chomping at the bit for that fight, to be honest. But
what do you think about Cormier and Ngannou? Who wins that fight?
I don't know. That's another one. I don't really want Cormier. I just want to protect all these people from Ngannou,
To be honest,
don't send any of them in. But
I think that that's a far easier matchup for Cormier than Miocic's.
Really? I can see the thinking though. Yeah, go on.
So Stipe is what, 6'3"? Ngannou's what, 6'5"? Something like that. DC is 5'11" on a good day.
Straight out of bed, yeah.
Straight out of bed, just after a stretch. DC is 5'11", right? I think Ngannou has great hands, but he has great hands because of the power he possesses. He doesn't necessarily have great hands like Stipe has great hands. How many times do you see Ngannou pick apart a fighter, find the shot, and land it? Not often. What you see is what he does to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. He powers up just before round one starts. It's like, what he reminds me of is those cars that used to pull back to get them to like gain speed, and you let go. And they,
yeah.
That's Francis Ngannou, right?
Yeah.
You pull him back, you let him go, and the elastic band comes out, and he just destroys whatever's in front of you, right?
Yeah.
But I think landing on DC would be more difficult. And I also think that DC has the wrestling chops to just wear him down. I really, really do. And I think whereas Miocic is a far better grappler than Ngannou, DC is also not stupid enough to be like, oh yeah, I can just knock him out with the shovel punch inside the clinch. No.
I would not recommend that as a game plan.
Do not
if I was
recommend.
DC coaches, it would not be top of my list of, try and knock out Francis.
But yeah, I think I'd like to see Daniel Cormier ride off into the sunset. I'd like to see him ride off into the sunset. I don't think he's one of the greatest of all time. I think he's a very good fighter that achieved what he's achieved, but I think now is the time for him to move on, frankly.
Do you not think DC is one of the greatest of all time?
No.
Oh, Harry, I disagree. This is I think if he did ride off into the sunset, I think it's a good time because I don't think he's going to add anything on now. To be fair, unless he did beat Ngannou, but that's really going to advance his legacy that much. Like for me, if I was making a case for him as one of the greatest of all time, I think there's been lots of people that have held, well, not lots, but more than there was. Maybe about 5 people, is it, that have held 2 belts at the same time?
Yeah, but come on, let's think about how he got the belt at light heavyweight. He got the belt because John Jones was stripped of the belt.
Yeah, but he still got the belt. He still defended it several times. And then when he went up to heavyweight, the reason why I put him in that conversation is because, say, forgetting the controversy with Conor when he got the 2 belts, there's not as much of a sort of weight difference between the 2 divisions, if that makes sense. Whereas I think light heavyweight and heavyweight, there is a big gap between those 2 divisions. So I think it's almost a first within itself that he managed to win the belt at light heavyweight and then knock out, Stipe Miocic and have this trilogy with him. I think because of that jump up in weight, it's kind of an unprecedented thing that he pulled off for me. So for that reason, I'd always have him in that sort of greatest of all time conversation.
I mean, there's also the controversy that DC eye poked the fuck out of Stipe, so he probably couldn't even see the shot coming anyway. There's also the question about whether he even made weight for some of those light heavyweight fucking titles. There's
Harry,
also
where's all this hate coming from? This man has this amazing career. And
this is not hatred at all, right? This is not.
He did foot stomp too much, or he did eye poke him a little bit.
There's not hatred at all, right? But I think that we have to be very, very rational when we're throwing out titles like the greatest of all.
No, so one of the greatest. He's not the GOAT, but
but even the greatest of all time, right? To me. No, to me, okay. The people to me that really deserve the greatest of all title conversation are people that really, really changed the game. Anderson Silva changed the game. John Jones changed the game. Georges St. Pierre changed the game. Mighty Mouse Johnson changed the game. You could argue in some fashion that Conor changed the game, from his fighting perspective and from his shit-talking perspective, his marketing perspective. But I'm merely talking about skills, right? I don't think that DC changed the game. I really, really don't. I think what he is a phenomenal grappler, and he's added onto that some really, really beautiful pressure boxing. Fine. But I don't think he changed the game. I really don't. And this is nothing, I know this isn't a hatred against DC. I think what he's achieved is phenomenal. But I don't think he's the greatest of all time. I really don't.
Because I definitely take that conversation. But,
even to your point about weight difference, right? Like, the guys, like 145 to 155 is deemed as a big jump. Sorry, not deemed as a big jump. But Conor at 145 is walking around at 170, 173. At 155, the guys are walking around at 190. That's an absolutely astronomical weight jump, really. From a guy that's competing at 155 to weigh-in day, you have some fighters that are putting on 20, 30 pounds before they get back into the cage, right?
Yeah, but in the same breath, though, at heavyweight, you have people like Mark Hunt that need to cut a lot of weight to get to
I
200.
agree. I agree. But Stipe doesn't cut any weight to make 230.
Either way, he still went up to that division. He still did it. But I see the points that you're making. I do think he changed the game. I think just the fact that he crossed those 2 weight divisions is a pretty unprecedented feat. But I see what you're saying. A very special fighter, either way, you know.
Sure,
And
I think...
And I don't want to watch him get murdered by Ngannou.
Yeah, sure. All right, fair enough. So we'll move on to, I guess, the most controversial fight of the evening, and that's Marlon Vera versus Sean O'Malley. Personally, for me, I've watched enough replays and I've watched enough breakdowns from the likes of Luke Thomas and whatever. And actually, John Kavanagh made a really, really important tweet that I'm going to just pull up. I don't think it's that controversial. But go on, tell me your thoughts about that match.
Yeah, well, first of all, so when I watched it first live, I thought it was, you know, lightning had struck twice and he had essentially stepped in a really strange way. We were seeing the Sukumtar fight again. That was the mind I was in when I watched the fight the first time. Then I went back this morning because I saw a lot of things like you were saying. Luke Thomas put a good thing out. I saw a lot of people saying there was a low leg kick landed by Marlon, which what's the name of the nerve in the leg?
It's called the common peroneal nerve.
Yeah, the peroneal nerve. So, and they were talking about how that was the same thing you saw in the Henry Cejudo DJ2 fight, the Michael Chandler fight.
Yeah.
So I went back and watched that kick, and I can't remember what stance Sean was in, but he essentially shifts the leg back immediately. And if you look close enough, that ankle is literally doing strange things from the minute he steps it back before he has that moment where he steps forward and his legs probably give out. So it seemed directly related to me on a second watch into the kick that I'd landed.
Yep.
And it's still a tricky one though, because like we'll get to this fight later on, but if you look at the TJ Brown, Danny Chavez fight, you have someone in TJ Brown that took maybe like 20 hard, low leg kicks.
Got dropped twice by leg kicks.
Yeah. And, you know, he's still going. He's still managing to, at a certain point, to turn the fight around. And, you know, Sean O'Malley takes one. And you got to think, either is there an existing injury there, or is there such a thing in this sport where some people have a strong peroneal nerve or whatever, and some people don't? Like, MMA is a crazy sport. Because if you think in boxing, the only thing you needed was a good chin. And these days, it's like, oh, that guy's got a great peroneal nerve on him. You know, it's like there's so many ways you've got to be tough in this sport. And if that is a weakness of Sean that he can't get rid of, I mean, that's a pretty big Achilles heel people can target, you know?
Yeah, I mean, so the tweet from John Kavanagh was the leg kick directly onto the right common peroneal nerve, resulting in the inability to dorsiflex the ankle, an increasingly common attack in MMA, right? So, yeah, and just to break this down for the people that didn't watch the fight, basically, Marlon Vera and Sean O'Malley are standing, you know, in range. Sean O'Malley is standing southpaw. Marlon Vera cracks in with a leg kick. It looks like it's just above the knee. And then immediately Sean steps back into orthodox. His ankle is all over the place. It looks like a slip. It looked like a slip on the program because you couldn't see Sean's feet. But then when you actually go and watch it back, his ankle just buckles. Now, Sean immediately understands that he's in the world of trouble. He circles off and keeps his back against the cage, which I thought was pretty intelligent because he didn't have to then put any weight on his right leg. As he then moves to evade some of Vera's attacks, he falls and Vera comes in, lands a really, really hard elbow, lands a couple of other strikes, and Herb steps in. Now, for me, at the time of actually watching it, I thought it was an early stoppage. But then watching the replay, you see when Vera lands that elbow that O'Malley is like out for half a second. And to be fair, Herb does a great job of coming in immediately and stopping that fight. I think the other reason he stopped that fight for good reason, in a good way, is if Sean couldn't stand, he's not going to be able to intelligently defend, right? So the fight has to be stopped. So I think Herb did a great job. I think that we may well see this be run back, even though it was a clean win, right? It's not a clean win in the eyes of most MMA fans that want to see a clean knockout or whatever it is. But for Sean, like, I think this is a problem, to be honest. Like, ever since the Sukumtar fight, he wears those tie wraps around his feet, right? So does he have weak legs? Is making 135 pounds for a 6'1" guy good for your bones? Probably not. Like, I don't know what the answer is here for Sean, and he'll come back, right? And we'll find out what the proper diagnosis of that was. But to your point, like, how do you protect the perennial nerve? Do you build muscle around the leg? What the fuck do you do, right? Like, I don't even know. But you're also very right to point out that if that is a problem that he has and he can't cover it, boy, I mean, you've basically got a trigger, right? And if somebody just knocks that, it's like a red button, an off switch. If somebody hits that off switch, you're fucked, right?
Yeah.
And if Sean O'Malley wants to go and fight at the top tier, a Piotr Jan, for instance, good luck. You want Jose Aldo leg kicking that leg? No, sir.
Yeah, and especially because for Sean, movement is such a huge part of his style, like when that happened, to go back to a really good point you made before about Herb's stoppage and why it was so good. It's crazy because I think most people, if they were jumping like that, it probably would have been stopped immediately. But I think Herb did a really good job of not only seeing that Sean had managed to survive that in a fight before, but also the strange thing, that perennial nerve thing that we're seeing in these fights, we obviously didn't get to see it in this one because Marlon jumped on him really quick. But if you're looking at the Chandler fight, the Cejudo fight, it does seem to recover potentially so who knows, if he'd gotten to the end of that round, it could have just gone, back to normal because we've seen it in both of those fights. But
I agree.
But I think Herb did the best thing he could do
for sure
to give a nod to Marlon. If you look at it, because I actually ended up watching the Sukumtar fight the night before with my brother, and Sukumtar takes him down, but he's almost doing everything that Sean O'Malley would want. Like, he's hugging him pretty close to side control. He's just keeping him there. Whereas Marlon got there, he was like, I'm going to posture up and I'm just going to hit you so hard that there was no way to survive it, which is one of the differences. If there's anything really good about Marlon Vera, is that guy is an opportunist, especially when it hits the ground. Like, the margin for error once he gets on top of you is just tiny.
Yeah, so as I was about to say, like, I don't know if we touched on this in the preview show, but one of the greatest assets that Marlon Vera has is when he has you hurt and dropped, you're fucked.
Yeah.
His ability to finish fights when they hit the ground is unreal. His accuracy for ground and pound, his ferocity, how vicious he is with strikes is insane. And when Sean dropped, I was like, oh no, like, this is not good. And to be fair, I initially thought Sean did well in the first sort of half a second to a second because he managed to get a grip of a Vera wrist, and he seemed to be blocking the shot that came, like Vera threw a hook and he seemed to block it, and then the elbow came and I was like, okay, this is done. Like, yeah, fuck this, it's over. And I think you're right. I think Herb did a really good job and he should be given props for that. I really do. A big win for Marlon Vera though. A big win. I thought it was a little bit salty afterwards. He said some things in Spanish that were a little bit unsavory. And again, he refused to shake Sean O'Malley's hand. But just to your point about the recovery, I mean, Sean couldn't stand and he had to be carried to the middle of the octagon for Herb to pick his hand up, right?
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
And like, Sean, basically the only thing keeping Sean up was Herb holding his wrist at that point.
Yeah.
I can't see a minute recovery You know, and it was what? He had two minutes left of the round to get through?
Yeah,
Jesus. I'm not sure.
I know. That's a very good point, actually, because it didn't seem to be recovering in the Sukumtar fight either.
No. And I think, you know, the other thing is, how does he get up? How does he get up? You know, to get up, he's going to have to either get to his knees and take shots, or he's going to have to be, I mean, initially he's going to have to re-guard, first of all. Well, that's going to need both of your feet. You're then going to have to push off Vera and not get hit. Like, it's so tough if you've got an ankle that's, you know, that's that broken. But anyway, we'll move on to the easiest pick of the night. And that was Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Junior Dos Santos. So, full disclosure, I actually lost the picks to this fight. I put it in a notepad and I had to reboot my machine and I didn't save them. So, yeah.
Probably quite good for me, to be fair.
Yeah, because, you know, it's funny, actually. Me, Liam, and Steve were talking about you, and we were like, for all the absolutely incredible analysis you have, your picks are always fucking useless.
My picks are really bad. The issue is, to be fair, it did help with the Stipe Cormier fight, but I don't know.
Did you pick Stipe?
Yeah.
I picked Stipe as well, yeah.
That was the only one, but I have so many other picks like that where it's like conventional wisdom will all point in one direction, and I'll be like, just, oh, well, I woke up feeling like the other guy wins today, and it's all great. You know, it's just, yeah, what can you do?
But for this JDS Jairzinho Rozenstruik fight, like, I thought JDS looked good, to be honest. Like, he looked good until he didn't.
I think these days, Junior Dos Santos does look really good until he doesn't. You know, I'd say that's a pretty, that's the biggest difference for me between sort of old Junior and new Junior. And I think in some ways it's a good thing because he took a lot of damage in those Kane fights. But, you know, if Junior would get dropped in the past, it was almost incredible, like what he could like recover and get back up and continue fighting, you know, whereas if you look at his losses to, you know, and again, fair enough, in Ngannou, Rozenstruik, Alistair Overeem, when he's down at the moment, he's down, you know, and that's it. And for me, to be honest, I don't really want to be watching him take, you know, much more damage, to be honest.
Yeah, I think, you know, we all picked, I mean, I think I picked Rozenstruik round 2, and I think everyone picked Rozenstruik by finish, right? So I think I'm going to echo Tommy's statements from the preview show, and that's JDS just doesn't need to be fighting anymore.
No.
Because you're not going to put him in there against Chris Dorcas from the undercard, or you're not going to put him in against an average heavyweight, because he'll muller them. But then when he mullers 5, 6, 7 of those guys, you're going to be like, oh, we'll give him Ngannou. No, I just, you know, let me just check how old Junior is. So he's 36, right? But I just don't need to see it anymore. I really don't. He's had his time. He won the belt. He's done what he came to do. He had the amazing trilogy with Kane. One of the greatest stories of UFC heavyweight history is that trilogy with Kane. I just don't need to see anything else. For Jairzinho, I mean, to be honest, I wasn't that impressed, really. Like, as I said, he was getting pieced up pretty handily, to be honest. I thought the thing that he did well is he always returned something. So if Junior hit him with something, he'd always return with a leg kick or a body kick or something. And, you know, Jairzinho said, I was biding my time waiting for the right shot. And it did feel like that. It did feel like he was waiting for the perfect shot. And to be honest, watching the fight, I thought this isn't going to go well, because what you find a lot of the time is guys that have been knocked out are looking for the perfect shot, and it just never comes because it's not perfect enough. But, you know, Jairzinho managed to land, and Jesus Christ. To be honest, I actually didn't like the stoppage in this fight from Dan Migliata, because Junior goes down, and then, as you say, the will comes in and he begins to recover and gets back up. And Jairzinho lands again, and then he's like out, and Jairzinho still manages to land 3, 4, 5 strikes before Dan comes in, and I didn't need to see it, frankly.
Yeah, I can't remember a whole lot about the stoppage outside of the minute that, you know, the perfect shot that Rozenstruik was looking for, when that did land, Yeah, that was scary stuff. I just wanted that stopped immediately, to be
Yeah,
honest.
me too. As soon as JDS hit the ground, first of all, I was like, that's enough. But yeah, basically, JDS got to his knees, and was in turtle for like half a second. Rosenstrike landed a couple of shots in turtle. JDS then got back to his feet, but was looking away from Jairzinho. Jairzinho hits him with a right hook that literally caves him. And it's one of those where, do you remember Danny Roberts in Manchester when he got knocked out by Mike Perry? And his legs just buckle underneath him. It was exactly like that. And I was like, why are we still fighting? And then Jairzinho then lands 3, 4, 5 strikes before Dan steps in. And I'm like, no way. Just didn't need to see it. Especially at heavyweight as well. I don't need to see those unanswered shots. But yeah, I want to move on to the greatest fight for me personally, which was Daniel Pineda, Herbert Burns. And it wasn't necessarily the greatest fight to watch. It was just so great because your pick was fucking awful. So to be honest, from the beginning of this fight, I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to speak to Sean after this. What we saw, to be fair, like Herbert Burns had his moments, right? He really did. But what we saw was a high-level jiu-jitsu practitioner versus an MMA fighter. That's what we saw, right?
A finisher, for sure.
Yeah, a finisher, absolutely.
With killer instincts in bundles, yeah.
Mate, like Pineda landed so many shots at the beginning and Burns looked tough. And, when it hit the ground, I thought Pineda has MMA grappling to a T, right? He gets to a position where he can land shots. He doesn't really care about passing so much. He just wants to hurt you. And he really did hurt Herbert Burns, right? He really, really did. But I thought the grappling exchanges in this were really fun, to be honest, really fun. Herbert nearly had Daniel's back at one point. Daniel turns in, recovers the position. Herbert then gets his sweep and comes up on top. And I just thought it was really nice, like really, really nice. But
yeah, definitely.
Eventually, my God, those elbows from Daniel Pineda were disgusting.
Yeah.
Disgusting. What did you think?
Yeah. Like, we spoke a little bit before, didn't we, with Marlon Vera? Like, there are certain guys in MMA and they get on top and it's almost like a rest for a guy underneath. And then you get people like Marlon Vera or Daniel Pineda where they get on top and they can almost do more sort of catastrophic damage to you there than they can stood up,
Yep.
Like it's crazy the amount of power that you're generating. But to go back to something you were saying before, and the commentators were talking about this quite a bit as well, I think the real difference that separated these two was just a classic example of a jiu-jitsu grappler in MMA and an MMA grappler, that understands jiu-jitsu. And I think it was a huge difference just all the way through because a lot of Herbert's attacks, it's like the sort of takedowns you'd see at an IBJJF tournament. So to give an example of what I'm trying to talk about, he did the same thing against Evan Dunham. And even there, you're kind of looking at it and you're a bit like, I'm not sure if this is going to work. So the biggest thing I'm talking about is when Herbert goes to take the back, he'll be in that back body lock position that you see Khabib, all these good wrestlers in. But then he'll sit underneath. Okay, yes. So the critical thing that's happening is he's putting his hips underneath his opponent's hips. So he'll either get the legs taken out like he did against Evan Dunham, manage to scramble for the back, and then he's in, a really solid winning position. But in MMA, when you're climbing up the ranks against these guys that are stronger and stronger grapplers, and people will know who've ever done any sort of, MMA wrestling, you never want your hips to go underneath the other guys at any point. It's why a lot of people don't take the back in MMA, because if you imagine I've got a seatbelt on you, okay, and my hips are on top of you, the chances of you getting up on top of me there are slim. But if I sit underneath, I better be amazing on the back because I've literally just put my whole body in a lay down position. So if you roll up on top, I'm just stuck there. It's why so many guys, when they're going for arm bars, just end up stuck underneath. And I think for Herbert, that is the sign where when he gets to those wrestling positions, he's not going for the standard mat returns or suplexes where his hips stay above his opponents. He's sitting his whole body underneath, which was a concern quite a while ago I had for Chase Hooper as well. It's like he's getting to these positions, but he's going for very jiu-jitsu style, back takes, which I think the level of wrestling of some of these MMA guys, if they're, because obviously this was Daniel's strength as well. Like, he was very composed in those positions. He knew, if I get on top, I'm not in a losing position here. I'm in a winning position. And I think that was just the story of the fight for me. Whereas Pineda, he's a black belt as well.
He is a black belt. Yeah.
Yeah.
18 submissions on his record.
Yeah, and he just looked so. He did not seem like there was a care in the world when he was in Herbert Burns' guard. Like, there was no hesitancy, there was no jumping out. He knew exactly where he needed to be, and he knew how, for MMA, from those dominant positions, where to land, you know, those devastating shots.
Because, I mean, like, for instance, Herbert threw up a regular armbar attempt, right? And whilst Daniel Pineda was in the armbar, he was using the same arm that was getting attacked to just keep landing hammer fists. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Like, for Herbert Burns, like, get up. But getting up then, I mean, he was getting smashed on the feet, frankly. You know, Daniel was hurting him on the feet a lot. And although Herbert managed to get his takedowns and whatever, and those takedowns were nice, don't get me wrong, they're pleasing on the eye, and we're going to see a very similar one in the Werner Jandiroba fight. It's like, yeah, there needs to be significant improvement for Herbert Burns, significant improvement, because, as you say, unless you're somebody of the caliber of jiu-jitsu of Damian Maia, that game plan is not going to work. And the thing that I really, really remiss is, at one point, Daniel Pineda was a 250 underdog in this.
It's probably because of people like me on the bets and odds. Like,
this guy doesn't finish fights, even though he's finished every single fucking fight that he's ever won. But yeah, anyway, I'm kind of pleased for Daniel Pineda. Like, obviously he got popped for steroids, so that's not good. But his second UFC return, and he looked like an accomplished fighter. He looked like a well-rounded MMA fighter, right? So
he looked really, really good. Yeah.
So I'll be really interested to see what they do with him next, and I'll equally be interested to see what they do with Herbert Burns, to be honest. So we move on to what was probably the worst fight on the card for me.
I said this was going to be fight of the night as well.
Jesus Christ. And that was Merab Dvalishvili versus John Dodson. And because you hyped this so much, I'm going to give you the painful discussion point. So go on, tell me what happened in this fight.
Listen, from my perspective, because I'm a pretty sad person, I actually did enjoy this fight. I think when you knew what was going on here, one thing that was quite impressive, even though it probably, you know, did make the fight a little bit more boring, was that Merab was aware of the threat that John Dodson posed on the feet, which wasn't something I thought just because of Merab's like kind of like crazy guy sort of demeanor. I thought he was just going to go in there, run across, and we were just going to see the TJ Dillashaw type counter left hand again from Dodson. Yep. But to his credit, he went out there. You could tell Ray Longo, you know, and Matt Serra probably had stern words about, look, just do not run in there and get countered by this guy. My issue with this one, or something that I realised in both, one thing in Dodson that I hadn't quite realised is if someone isn't running at him and putting the pressure on him, he's one of these counter fighters that doesn't have many attacks off of the front foot. So if John Dodson isn't hitting someone on the counter, it's very rare that you're going to see John Dodson flick a switch, start pressuring, start, blitzing in and really hurting people. It's almost like if the person's not coming to him and if he's being out-feinted, he doesn't have another thing to sort of change to. Yep. And then for Merab, we spoke about this quite a bit before, but I thought it was really evident in this fight, the whole idea of, Merab has the biggest takedown percentage per round, but what it comes with, which was evident in this fight, is he would get some of the, the best double leg lifts. You go into a big slam. John Dodson was off and out. I don't think, technically speaking, Merab actually completed a takedown in this fight against Dodson. And part of that's credit to Dodson. He has a really, really good takedown defense, but in my mind, Merab's a really exciting contender, especially when you're thinking of the people at the top of this division striking-wise. But he's got to iron out that thing, because I was looking at this and I was imagining, say, Merab against someone like PTR. If you're not holding PTR down, he can get up all day long. Mate,
I don't think that Merab would even get close to taking PTR down, to be honest. So I was really, really, really unimpressed by both fighters. We know that John Dodson is really hard to take down, and when you do take him down, it's really hard to hold him down, right? So tell me why, when Merab picked John Dodson up, had him on his shoulder, slammed him to the floor, he just let go and stood over him. Why? Why? Why bother wasting your energy on such a huge, like, from an energy perspective, a big double leg slam like that is a massive energy transaction. Massive. So why spend all that energy to just let go? Why? And, you know, you're right that when Merab did eventually take Dodson down and attempt to hold him there, Dodson was stiff-arming beautifully. He was getting his hips from under him and he was getting back up and running away. Phenomenal, phenomenal. But we've seen John Dodson do that forever, right? And you're absolutely right. I think your analysis is spot on that Dodson is not an attacking fighter. And equally, what he didn't want to do, I think, is he didn't want to close the distance in a way that he wasn't completely comfortable with. Because if he did, we saw Merab do it. He just ran into the cage and tried to get a double leg, right? So, you know, I also think that John Dodson looked really small in that matchup. And he didn't look like he made Merab respect his power in any way, shape or form, even though he did land a little bit. But look, Merab was 0 for 20 on his takedowns. And if Dodson had landed just a little bit more, he would have won that fight.
Yeah, and it's a shame as well. And I say a shame, you can always improve these things. It's just whether or not, you know, he's going to see that this is an issue. But one of the strengths that these Sambo world champions have when they come into MMA is that they have a greater variety of takedowns than you see for most people in terms of what they're going to. So one thing Rab did that was really nice is that when he got up against the fence against Dodson, at first I was like, there's no chance he's even going to get Dodson down here. But he's so good at changing between, especially that like high crotch knee tap combo that he does, which, you know, is a really rare thing to see. He's so good at jumping between those attacks and chaining them. But it's like he has such a variety there. It's like when he gets down, you expect him to be obviously not as good, but in the same school of thought as someone like a Khabib or someone like a Kamzat, you know, who gets a really good takedown. They've got the variety, but then they've got another whole game once to get down there to keep it there. Because, like you say, doing all that amazing work and then just getting up and standing over the guy. Because I think it was you that told me this in one of the other podcasts. But do you say that there's been a change in the rules recently so that takedowns don't score?
So it's not a recent. Really, it's not that recent, but what it is they see a takedown as a transition of position. It's not a scoring thing. So if you take somebody down, and let's say you take me down, you put me up against the fence, you take me down, and you end up in the close guard, and I wrap you up, and you can't land strikes. Nobody's scoring anything because you don't score for defensive positions, and you're not doing anything, right? So nobody scores. Now, if you posture up in close guard and you start landing strikes, you're scoring, right? If I manage to get an overhook on you and I'm landing elbows, I'm scoring, right? But just taking somebody down doesn't score anything. So this is my point about Dodson would have won the fight. Although he's being picked up and slammed down, nothing's happening. On the judges' scorecard, 0 things are happening. The reason Merab won that fight was because he landed just a little bit more than Dodson did. Yeah. And if Dodson had been on the front foot a little bit, landed a few more leg kicks, landed a couple of hard right hands, he would have won that fight. Stupid. Fucking ludicrous. And for Merab, like, I mean, obviously he's not going to fight Aljo, right? Fine. But I think a Marlon Moraes, a Jimmy Rivera, a Pedro Munoz, a Piotr Jan, all have, I mean, maybe not Jimmy Rivera because he can't get taken down, but like if you put him in with Piotr Jan, right? Piotr Jan gets Merab Dvalishvili out there in 2 rounds.
Yeah, there's definitely some things to look at, and you know, having a teammate like Aljamain Sterling as well, who he has all that variety of takedowns, but then he has a really, really good top game as well when he's getting to the ground. It seems like something to look at.
They've got Frankie Edgar in there as well, right?
Like,
what are we doing? what are we doing, lads? Like, as supposed team captain, Frankie Edgar, how are we celebrating that Merab has broken the record for not being able to hold someone down? Why?
Yeah, it's a tricky one because at the same time, like I think Tommy said this last week. As much as we can sit from the outside and say this should have been easy. I'm not the one in there trying to hold John Dodson down, so
Of
it's
course,
probably
but
tricky. It's just like you say. It's just observations from the outside. I think Merab has like just bags and bags and bags of potential, and he does
yes,
some really cool things. So it would just be cool, however which way, if he could add that into his game as well.
I agree. I mean, look, if that guy can take 18 takedowns and make it 3 or 5 takedowns,
I
you have
know. Could you imagine?
a
Yeah.
serious prospect on your hands. Because even John Dodson, for all the great takedown defense that he had, and to be fair to him, he did show really good takedown defense even before Merab had picked him up and slammed him down. Like at the clinch exchanges, he was really good at getting his underhooks, moving away from the fence. Really, really nice stuff. Really nice stuff. But if you can get somebody like Merab to be able to hold someone down and have a top game, oh my God, you have a motherfucker on your hands. Because as
Yeah.
you rightly say, his array of takedowns are beautiful. He has so many things in his locker, so many transitions, so many chain attacks that, it's just fucking phenomenal, really. Phenomenal.
For
But
sure.
anyway, we'll move on to Vince Pichel versus Jim Miller.
Oh.
I really enjoyed this fight. I have a bag of notes on this fight, so I'm just going to pull up the notes for this fight. I thought that round one, I actually scored this fight, and then I went back and saw what the judges scored it, and I scored it the same way. So for me, round one was pretty even, to be honest. I thought that Jim and Vince were both landing, a decent clip. I was impressed overall in this fight by Vince Pichel's grappling, to be honest. He was not scared at all to go to the ground with Jim Miller, and I thought that was really impressive. But I gave Jim Miller round one because he landed hard strikes. Vince Pichel landed hard strikes, but Miller got the back. Didn't get the hooks, but got the back. He attempted a no hook rear naked choke, turned it into a modified guillotine. Then he eventually turned up to 3/4 mount, got to turtle, and he rolled for a really tight calf slicer, which Vince Pichel looked like he was defending okay, but was still feeling. And although there was like 15 seconds of the round, right, so we just got it out fine. Because Jim Miller was closer to finishing the fight, I gave him the 10-9. But from then, round 2 and round 3, you just saw Vince Pichel was just phenomenal, frankly. His stand-up game was really good. And although Jim was getting his licks in, it felt like Jim Miller was slowing a lot. And then when they got to the ground, Vince Pichel with his elbows and his strikes and ground and pound was just beautiful. One thing that I do want to highlight, though, and I will highlight this just before you talk, is Miller did something really, really brilliant when Vince Pichel had his back. So Vince Pichel was up against the fence, right? And he was looking for Jim Miller's back. Now, what happened was Jim had a really high elbow on his left-hand side, which stopped Vince from really getting a grip of his neck. And what Miller then did is he lifted up the leg of Vince Pichel. Now, the reason why he did that is because it deads the hip. And when Miller then turned in to recover the position, Vince couldn't move because his back was against the fence. And I thought that was fucking brilliant. Absolute brilliance from Jim Miller. I mean, of course, he lost the round, he lost the fight, but that small bit of jiu-jitsu was beautiful. Go on.
For sure. I think there were so many like little tricks like that in this fight. This is actually an interesting one because when I first came back to watch this, I was in the middle of one of the worst hangovers I possibly ever experienced, and there were so many like transitions in this fight or reversals. It was not the fight to watch hungover. So I came back to it today when the sort of the mist had cleared, and this was just so good, just because of all those positions, like the one you just broke down then, they're almost like these 50-50 positions. And it's rare that you see so many like counters in those 50-50 positions. So first off, Jim Miller going for that calf slicer,
hilarious,
but pulling on the top of the toe so that he was bending it like a heel hook. That looked horrendous. But in terms of the 50-50 one, there was a really nice bit. And I think this kind of was the story of the fight to an extent, where in most of these, in most of those battles, Vince Pichel was just like a step ahead a lot of the time. So there was a really nice one where Vince was on top in half guard, and Jim went for the Kimura. And shout out to James Orr, because he like showed me this ages ago, and it's not, you don't usually see, especially MMA guys do this, but if you imagine Jim Miller's got the Kimura, and then Vince Pichel is like switching his body, so he goes to like that reverse half guard position, but in the process, as he drops his weight through, he's popping that elbow through the Kimura and then grabbing his own, and it's quite hard to see on the broadcast because, you know, that's happening up against the fence. But I saw that and I was like, it's just so good to see. It's rare in MMA that you get a sort of grappling match like this where it's just a scramble fest. Like, you know, think Tim Elliott versus Louis Smoker. You know, I definitely would whack this on the list of fights where there's loads of crazy sort of counters and stuff. There was another really nice moment in it where I think Jim Miller was going for the guillotine on
modified guillotine, the arming guillotine.
On Pichel. And Pichel went for that heartbreaker escape that you saw Conor McGregor use against Chad Mendes and stuff. But Jim Miller did the really nice thing that Nate Diaz did, where essentially when the person rolls to their back to get away from the legs so they don't get guillotined, instead of holding on to the guillotine and ending up underneath, hence the heartbreaker, because it's a fucking heartbreaking situation to be in. When he goes underneath and he felt Vince roll to his back, he let go of the guillotine and just goes for an underhook and comes on top. It's like beautiful. Just those little things, that level of decision making, you know, you only get that in these like really veteran matchups. And to go to what you said before, I think that Pichel was a dark horse going into this because Jim Miller has fought about as much as possible as he possibly could. So you know what you're going to get with Jim Miller, whereas Pichel sort of shows up on the radar, vanishes, shows up, vanishes. But yeah, I thought his grappling was the big X factor, you know, for Pichel. I don't think any of us really thought he was not only going to be able to hang with Jim Miller, but I think he had Jim Miller in most of the dangerous situations in that fight, you know.
I think I agree. I think the only difficulty that I have with Jim Miller in this fight is it felt like Miller was too accepting of playing guard. And I feel like he was too accepting of trusting in his jiu-jitsu and trusting in his submissions that he would eventually get hold of Vince in something deep and finish it. But I think for Vince, he was just more than happy to ride on top, to take the back when he can, and to just land absolute bombs from the top. And I think that really was the story of the second and the third round. Although there was some really beautiful back and forth grappling, essentially what happened was Jim Miller played bottom, Vince Pichel played top and landed strikes. And that's why he wins.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just, there's not much more to say.
Brilliant fight.
Yeah, really brilliant fight. To be honest, if it wasn't for Kai Kamaka versus Tony Kelly, that was fight of the night for me.
Because I think Tommy called that before as well. So shout out for Tommy. He did pretty well there.
Absolutely. So Werner Jandiroba versus Felice Herrig was about as one way as you're going to get in a grappling match. Again, I made some notes on this. So I'll just read out my notes and you can agree or disagree. So they both basically started the match. They threw one strike each, and that was a flicking leg kick to be like, where are you? Are you in range? Jandiroba then stepped in with a lunging jab, switched stance, got the outside trip, took Felice Herrig down to the mat. And the thing that was really good with Jandiroba is she immediately kills Felice Herrig's hips. Immediately kills them. Then she locks up the shoulder pressure and she just put her in a really nice pin position, right? Because what she was doing was, in that half guard, she was triangling, basically putting on a lockdown of her own on Felice Herrig's bottom leg. So for Felice Herrig to get out of that position, she would have needed to get to a hip, get some frames, and then she could start to regard or push Jandiroba off. But because Jandiroba had passed the knee line of the knee shield, so the knee was basically useless, what we then saw was Jandiroba use this weird lockdown type position. And for anyone that doesn't know what lockdown is, essentially you're putting your legs in a triangle position and then hooking one of your feet onto your opponent's legs. That really, really deadened the hip of Felice, and you could see it. Felice was basically super stuck there and couldn't do anything. Now, what happened was Jandiroba tried the knee cut, and Felice reacted well to the knee cut, got up, and kind of got back out for a little second. However, as soon as Jandiroba wades back into the guard of Felice, starting with a half guard pass, she starts to work, puts Felice against the fence with a nice body lock. She gets the Dagestani handcuff, flattens her out, and it's kind of all she wrote from there, to be honest. Felice managed to turn in, she gave her back. Then Jandiroba took mount to try and escape mount. Felice leaves one of her arms dangled. And this is the bit that was really beautiful for me from Jandiroba, is Felice knew that arm, the arm that was having essentially an overhook on Jandiroba, was in trouble. So what Jandiroba did is allowed Felice to pummel it inside. And as Felice did pummel inside, Jandiroba switched immediately to the other arm and got the armbar. And that was so slick and so beautiful from Jandiroba that I was just like, yeah, I need to watch that again.
Definitely. It was such a good performance from Jandiroba. And I think that you bang on with the analysis there, to be honest. Like, I think something the commentary team said, which really summed this up, it was Dominic Cruz, actually. He was saying that you see with these high-level jiu-jitsu people that sort of transfer over, when they get on top, there's no space, you know. So that links to everything you were saying about she was passing the knee line. There was just no point where she didn't know the movement Felice was going to make to try and get out before Felice made it, you know. And obviously we've spoken already about jiu-jitsu people sort of transitioning over to MMA and the issues. I think something that Jandiroba's done really well is she's taken the strengths from that jiu-jitsu style, but she's made sure that it's situated in an MMA grappling style. So you've got all those amazing things with the passing, and obviously the armbar followed the same concept. You know, she left no space at all, and when she transitioned, there was no part of what she was doing where Felice was going to get out of that armbar, even if it was like adjusting the thumb at the end. But even with that, you know, she still has the Dagestani handcuff. She has really nice shoot boxing as well, which I think was something going into this. I think Felice is a really good striker, but the takedown threat makes her sort of hesitant. So in my mind, I thought Jandiroba was going to be a bit of a nightmare matchup. If there's anyone out there who is as sad as me and like a really sort of, you know, like a bit of a takedown nerd, go watch Jandiroba fight Amy Montenegro in Invicta, because she lands the same takedown there that TJ Dillashaw hit John Lineker with over and over again, which is a really rare takedown to see, because you have to be a very good shoot boxer to time that takedown correctly, you know. And again, it just speaks to the overall point that I'm trying to make, that Jandiroba isn't only a serious threat on the ground, you know, but she's put it into an MMA grappling style, you know, which is really good to see in terms of everything that we said before about Herbert Burns and stuff like that. So yeah, I think since Sean O'Malley is probably out for a bit, this is the next hype train for me to jump on now. You know, I'm Team Jandiroba all the way to the title now.
I mean, to be honest, I can probably agree. All the way to the title, shut your fucking mouth.
Mate, that's how hype trains work. I'm 100% invested now.
No, Jesus fucking Christ. I think Jandiroba is a really good fighter, and I think that that I'd be really interested to see what they do with her next, because Felice Herrig is a name in that division, right? Like, not a huge name, but in the division there's not many huge names. So I'd be interested to see what they do with her. I really will. So we'll move on to the fight that you absolutely lambasted both of these gentlemen.
To be fair, it was mainly saying that Danny Chavez didn't exist, which, I said
Well,
was a pretty
you
bold
said
claim.
that Danny Chavez didn't exist. You said that he had taken Mexican supplements. You said that his 2-year layoff to come back to round one knockouts was obviously steroid abuse. You said
No,
that
no, hang on. So you're combining mine and Tommy's theories.
mate,
Tommy
it's the
said
same thing.
about steroids. I said that none of that even exists. I said the UFC just made all of that up, and that Danny was actually a homeless guy that they used to sort of fill this card.
Disgusting. Anyway, the first 30 seconds, I was like, okay, Danny Chavez is fast. Danny Chavez is very fast. He
Definitely
landed
not homeless,
definitely not homeless. No, he had a beautiful shaved head, lovely clean facial hair.
For sure,
Definitely not homeless.
He has a home.
Definitely has a home. But yeah, we had the story of the first round to me was the low kick, right? Danny Chavez was slamming rear low kicks into TJ Brown's leg. So much so that at the end of the first round, TJ Brown had at least 2 open wounds on his leg and a lot of bruising, right? But Danny Chavez was he was just quicker, essentially. The shots were just coming faster than TJ Brown could throw. The low calf kicks were coming. Whenever TJ Brown began to step in, he would just take his leg away with a really, really good low kick. And he dropped TJ twice with low kicks in this fight. Now, the fight was 29-28. What was really strange was TJ's best round was after he'd been beaten the fuck out of for 2 rounds. But overall, I mean, I don't want to go too deep into this. Essentially, what we saw from Danny Chavez was really, really good takedown defense, really good work against the cage, really good reversals when it got to the cage if he wanted to reverse. If not, he was really good at just disengaging, pushing TJ away and starting again. Lightning 1-2s, really nice counter hooks, and yeah, just dominant leg kicks. And then TJ Brown eventually gets the takedown, has a little bit of a roll on the ground. I thought Danny Chavez reversals on the ground were really good. And then, yeah, I mean, I think both fighters should get another crack, but I don't think Danny Chavez is an ultra prospect or anything like that. He'll just be a decent guy. I reckon if you've got somebody that can punish the leg kicks of Danny Chavez, and meet him. Sorry, because there was one thing that Danny Chavez definitely left himself open for the counter a few times too, and was a bit sloppy when TJ was running in, and he was definitely tired in that 3rd round. So if you've got somebody that either is a little bit of a better grappler or has more power than Danny Chavez, then I think that will be an interesting fight. But yeah, go ahead. What did you see?
Yeah, no, I think that was the same. I think TJ Brown demonstrated a granite perennial nerve on this one.
Jesus.
Like, if you could take out, if you could remove his and put it in Sean O'Malley's leg, like, who knows what that guy.
Why would you do that? Just because Sean O'Malley's your boy? You want to ruin TJ Brown's perennial nerve just because you've got fucking Sideshow Bob Jr. on your hype train?
Yeah, mate, I'm still on the hype train. This is how things work. I'm extremely loyal, but yeah, I thought Danny Chavez looked really good. It's like you say, straight off the bat, he looked really, really fast. Everything he landed seemed to have like a bit of an effect on TJ Brown, but I was also surprised with TJ Brown that when you looked at the state that his leg was in, even in the 1st round, I was sort of looking at it thinking, he is, the writing's on the wall kind of thing. Like, this fight is going to end very, very soon. And the fact that he managed to fight through that and come back, and even in that 3rd round, I think Danny Chavez was saying himself, he was surprised at how much TJ Brown sort of came forward. And I think it's an interesting point, and we're probably going to get to this with that crazy fight on the Fight Pass prelims. But some of these guys that are getting these shots where they wouldn't usually be getting the shot because of everything going on in the world right now, some of these fights on the undercards are ending up being absolute barn burners, because I genuinely think some of these people are coming on and just fighting for their life. Like, I was reading a little bit about TJ Brown and everything he'd gone through on the way to the Contender Series fight. And, at the start of that fight, he got dropped and then proceeded to dominate the rest of the fight. But yeah, some of the guys these names that we don't know, I think we saw the same thing with Justin James as well.
Yep, came in and absolutely mullered my boy in about fucking 30 seconds.
Yeah, because it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it, in combat sports? It's like, oh, whoever's hungry is going to win this one. Like, that's what it's all about. But you know, I think it is playing a role with some of these guys that are getting a big shot. It's crazy what TJ Brown managed to fight through.
Yeah.
And like you say, I think Danny Chavez is a solid fighter. I take back everything that I said.
Good. Shall we also just talk a little bit about how Daniel Pineda took down Herbert Burns with a head and arm throw? Should we talk about that?
I'm not sure we should, to be honest.
I'm really upset because I wanted to leave it actually until you'd sung Daniel Pineda's praises for me to then be like, yeah, just so you know, he took him down with a head and arm throw. So yeah.
Listen, I'm already bitter enough about that fight. I don't think my little brother didn't know anything about this podcast, and I was just there, like, just screaming for Herbert Burns to make it to a decision. He was like, "Sean, why do you care so much?" I'm like, "Please, don't, keep going, Herbert, keep going." And you know,
got fucked, mate.
He obviously didn't. Yeah.
So the next fight on the card was Liviana Souza versus Ashley Yoder. I will put my hands up and say I didn't watch this fight. So Sean, if you could take it away with what happened.
Well, Harry, you would have loved this fight because Livia Souza went for a head and arm throw in the late going of the fight, and yeah, it was terrible to watch. It was absolutely terrible. But the fight in general was pretty good, and I feel like it was close to what I thought it was going to be going into this. Like, one thing it did highlight to me, which I think you'll see if you go and watch it, is how tough Ashley Yoder is. Like, she's a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter anyway, but there was a big power difference between Livia Souza and Ashley, which I don't think I sort of anticipated, to be honest, in the early going. And Ashley was taking some solid shots, but she was never sort of looking for a way out of the fight or anything like that. And she was doing well, like we said before, when she was going with a sort of straight left to the body and chaining it up to the head. I think there was just a big difference for me in the power. I think as far as the grappling was concerned as well, you had a bit of a Fabricio Verdum, Alexei Olenek thing going on, where essentially Ashley would get to the back of Livia Souza and almost end up throwing herself over the top. She'd go too high up the back, which, you know, again, I think back control for MMA is something you've got to really adjust to make sure that you're as far back on the hips, maybe in that sort of Suliov stretch position that you see Khabib and all the Dagestani guys use a lot as well, because you're just more secure there because she kept throwing herself over the top. And I know from listening to interviews with her that her grappling was something she really wanted to show in this one. But it was a good back and forth fight. Livia Souza, I think going into her next fights, I'll definitely remember that she's hitting a lot harder than most of the girls at strawweight.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing coming in for Liviana Souza was, you know, 2 TKO KOs and 8 submissions. And generally what happens is she knocks her opponent down or hurts her opponent, then manages to get them to the mat, finishes them, right? So yeah, I'll be interested to see what happens with her too. Now, I mean, what was supposed to be the absolutely worst fight on the card turned out, all in all, to be not that terrible. And that was Chris Daukaus versus Porker Parker. Or Parker, whatever.
Whatever variation of his name that you choose.
Yeah, whatever variation of his name. What this really looked like is a guy that you would find fighting in a car park versus a guy that's done like 8 months of MMA training, right? Like,
Jesus.
I mean,
are you saying that Chris Daukaus is an ultra MMA fighter?
I'm saying that Chris Daukaus has done like 8 months worth of MMA training, maybe.
So a good ultra MMA fighter.
Like, I think Chris Daukaus looked like he had more technical assets than Parker Porter did, because what we saw, right, is when they were just in the middle of the cage slugging at each other, Porter looked like he knew kind of what was going on, and he looked like he had very heavy hands, right? Chris Daukaus had a bit of blood on his nose and a bit of blood on his lip after the fight. So obviously, you know, getting caught by Porter is not something you necessarily want to be. But, you know, when it was coming to clinch exchanges, right, like Parker Porter just basically went forehead to forehead and tried to just out-muscle Daukaus, and Daukaus just was like, cool, I'm just going to reverse you now and put you against the fence. Is that all right? And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll take that. And, you know, Daukaus just had a more variety of shots. He had knees, he had left hooks, he had body shots, he had, you know, leg kicks, he had all this sort of stuff. And the 1-2 was landing well for Daukaus. But the actual finish came from basically like if anyone played any boxing games back in the day, it was like a triangle square, right? It was like a left hook, right hand, right?
Like a Tekken cheat combination.
Exactly, right. And I think actually the second left hook dropped Porter, but the right hand came in and really like hurt him badly. And then as Porter got back up, Dorcas decided to, just absolutely fucking mollywaddle a knee into his chin. And again, like, I thought the stoppage here was really good. As soon as that knee lands, Herb was on his way in, and Dorcas managed to land one more shot, but he was so close to Porter at the time, it would have been difficult to stop that, I think. But yeah, I thought overall it was a good stoppage, but a pretty terrible fight.
Yeah, I think your comparison to the triangle square is probably one of the best comparisons that I've ever heard, to be honest. What was the name of the boxing character on Tekken? Can you remember? Because all I remember was it was a similar thing where essentially there was this one what was it?
Paul, I think his name is. The
Paul.
White dude with long hair. With high hair. Yeah, it's Paul. Yeah,
and there was like one combination where if you learnt it and just did that, just spammed that one combo, there was like literally no one on the game that could beat you.
Yeah.
So yeah, Chris, he wasn't quite as cool as that. But I thought Chris looked good in this one. And
me too.
Going back and watching his fights beforehand, I saw there was a difference in terms of Parker Porter, like you say, is just a ginormous guy that, one of his legs probably weighs the same as like Sean O'Malley, or something. But he's like just a giant guy, whereas Chris, I don't know how to pronounce his surname,
Dorcas.
But yeah, Dorcas. He was, even when I was watching his fights before, he's very sort of smooth, very in and out, very sort of defensively wary. And for a big man, moves quite quick, which are promising signs for a heavyweight, because at heavyweight, there's a lot of Parker Porters in the world, but it's those other skills like speed and everything else that he's sort of looking for. And I saw that Chris had a good right hand. I think that was my prediction. It was an overhand right going into this, but he has a very sharp right hand. A matchup for Chris next going forward, which I think would be good for both guys because they both just debuted, would be maybe Chris versus Tom Aspinall.
I like that.
So Darren Till's training partner. I think that's a good fight for Tom Aspinall. I personally think Tom's ceiling is higher. But two very sharp, very quick strikers at heavyweight, which, let's be honest, in the lower sort of realm of that division, you don't find many guys like that really. But it was a solid. Chris did what he was supposed to do, being a champion in another organisation against someone who is
a sandbag and eating too many trifles. That's it. That's all you need to
hear. But yeah, I imagine Parker Porter is probably going to go on to the regionals now. Maybe fight Daniel Cormier in like an exhibition fight or some crazy. So his manager, who I can only imagine is like an absolute sociopath, is just going to throw him in there with like someone that shouldn't be in the regionals. But we'll see. It was a good fight.
Was it? All right. So we'll move on to the last fight of the card, which was actually a good fight. Now, again, I must admit I have only watched the first round of this fight, but I have seen the highlights and everything else. Kai Kamaka versus Tony Kelly. So, Sean, if you want to take us away with your thoughts on that fight.
Yeah, so I was in a similar situation to you where this was like the only fight that I sort of missed on the Fight Pass prelims. It's probably because we didn't, talk about it because it was added last minute, but it's just when I did go back and watch it sort of quickly this morning, I was like, I've missed, one of the best fights basically. But I think it goes to show what we were saying before. Some of these guys that are coming in, I couldn't tell you anything about either of these gentlemen. I've not heard anything about them on the regionals, but some of these guys that are coming in are crazy. Some of these last minute, virus replacements, and, who knows whether they're going to be the same when they sort of climb up the ranks against some UFC caliber opponents. But there was just some absolute madness in this one. Like something that's very rare in MMA is that you see two guys trading on the inside the same way boxers do. So, for example, whenever Daniel Cormier goes on the inside, he's got a single collar tie, he may be pulling for an underhook, and then he's punching with his free hand. So it's a combination between wrestling and boxing. Whereas what these guys did, which is what, you know, just pro boxers do, is they're meeting. They're not actually holding each other at all. They are just standing head to head, throwing in uppercuts and stuff like that. You know, it was almost as if they'd agreed beforehand that they were just going to have a boxing match. You know, I'm not saying they had the skill of professional boxers. I'm just saying it was that style. But yeah, from what I've seen, this one was absolutely insane. And yeah, I'm pretty sure they both got the bonus as well.
They did get the bonus. They got the fight of the night. And I think the tale of this to me was, it was a very back and forth fight from the highlights and whatever. And, you know, Kai Kamaka looked far sharper in the first round than Tony Kelly. And I thought what we also saw was Kai Kamaka used some really nice double leg takedowns to take the fights to the mat. Both of these guys were well versed in everything. You know, they had nice kicks. They had really nice boxing for MMA, whatever. Fuck your pro boxer bullshit, whatever. Pro boxing shill. But yeah, I thought both of them just put on an absolutely phenomenal performance, and I will go back and watch it in full because I think it's important to do so. But I'd love to see both of these guys be kept on in the UFC and both of them given another chance, to be honest. I think when you go out, and as you say, when you go out and you fight like that, I think, you know, you should be warranted another opportunity, in my opinion. I really do.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and that's all the fights. So, I mean, any final thoughts? Any thoughts about the next couple? I think the next card coming up is absolutely fucking awful.
Let me have a look. Is this the Edgar versus Munoz?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, wow. Alonzo Menefield versus Oven St. Preux. That's interesting.
For a co-main event, terrible.
Yeah, that was a pretty sarcastic, interesting.
Yeah,
but,
and then you've got Marcin Prashanio, never heard of him. Mike Rodriguez, never heard of him. Maria Agapova, she's phenomenal. Against Shana Dobson, never heard of him. Daniel Rodriguez, Takashi Sato, whatever, who cares?
I actually like Daniel Rodriguez. I think that could potentially be a pretty good fight. I was quite impressed with him the last time he
Amanda
was out.
Lemos, Mizuki Inoue. Okay, we know Inoue. Austin Hubbard, Joe Selecki is a good fight. Dwight Grant, Jaron Gooden, whoever that is. Then it's just, again, three other guys that we have absolutely no idea who it is. So you have to see a breakdown for that card. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's great. When's the next big one?
It's 253, and 253 is Israel Adesanya, Paulo Costa, which we are absolutely going to do. So currently the main card for that looks like Izzy Adesanya, Paulo Costa, Kai Kara France versus Brandon Royval in the co-main. I think that's a bit fucking nuts to put Brandon Royval in a co-main event straight away after like one UFC fight, but whatever.
Yeah, that could always shift as well, I imagine, if they keep adding, you know.
Claudia Gadelha versus Yan Zhuainan, which is whatever. Hakeem Jawadu versus Zybara Tukugov is a good fight.
Yeah, I really like Zybara.
And yeah, there isn't anything else for that card as of yet. But we will definitely do a UFC 253 breakdown, that's for sure.
Awesome.
We may do one for Smith versus Rakic, but at the moment there isn't many fights.
We'll do a single breakdown for the one fight on that card.
Yeah, exactly. But,
brilliant.
Any closing thoughts, Mr. McGuinness?
Probably an apology again for saying that Danny Chavez didn't exist and that he was equivalent to Mickey Rourke's opponent. I made all of those statements based on zero evidence. I can't even say that there was anything to point me to that. I just made it up, basically, because we were being silly. But, yeah.
Please, can you also make a
thank you finisher as well?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
And headlock throws are shit. That is.
Fuck you! How dare you?
Harry, you realise that the more you go along with this whole joke, people are going to think that you actually appreciate that technique. You're losing integrity yourself.
Mate, the only integrity I'm going to lose is by not promoting your head and arm instructions that comes out in a couple of weeks.
That's very... People are going to be waiting for that instruction a long time, Harry.
Mate, they're not. They're not. As soon as this thing is done and Scramble is open... Like,
I know, you and Steve, I'm going to end up like in the back of a van. I'm just going to wake up, have the hood taken off, and you guys will be like, all right, we're filming.
That's right. That's what's going to happen.
Jesus.
But yes, look, as always, I will thank you for your time. It's been phenomenal as always. We will probably see you for UFC 253.
Amazing.
Until then, take care. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, sir.